Hello friends. Today I have a very fun series to share with you all, so buckle up. This is Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series.
And the thing is that these scars are scary, but they are just small scars. We should never be afraid of them.
I have been seeing these books around individually for a while, but I somehow never realized they were a series, despite how similar they actually are. Sometimes the simplest things go over my head. But then I finally started putting two and two together. I would see one and be like, hey, that book kind of reminds me of something, when it was in fact reminding me of the other books in the series. I'm going to try to talk about these books without giving any spoilers, so if you're interested in reading them, you won't be spoiled. But if I do end up saying anything that is kind of a spoiler, I'll be sure to put a warning up on the screen before I say it. I'm just gonna say right now, I really enjoyed this series, and I recommend you read it if you haven't already. This series didn't capture my attention right away, like I was saying how I saw a book and ignored it and was like, I've seen that before. So I didn't go running out to read this as soon as it was released, and I don't really know why I passed over it so many times, but I finally decided to go for it, and I'm really glad I did. So even if the covers or the titles or something strikes you as something that you wouldn't be interested in, I think you should give it a chance. Of course, it's not perfect, but it has a lot going for it. If you enjoy these types of videos, please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future book rants, rambles, or recommendations. So now, let's get reading.
Every change has a reason. Baby, let it come to you. Every soul, every season lives outside of status quo. If we stop believing we're meant to be, expanding our abilities. If the passion's gone, we are doing it wrong. Baby, you and I should start living now. With the whole world at our feet, we could stay or we could leave. There is nothing in between. So baby, we should start living now. 'Cause we only have this life. Wanna laugh and wanna cry. I don't wanna waste my time. So baby, we should start living now.
So this story follows 28-year-old Leila Macapagal and her family. Leila is Filipino. Her family is very traditionally Filipino. So this already gives this book a flair and uniqueness that I haven't seen very much in fiction books. So if you're thinking this is just going to be another generic murder mystery, think again. Leila is from a small town in the Midwest called Shady Palms, and it seems like the closest major city is Chicago because they reference that a lot. This is a town of 20,000 people where everybody knows each other, and that means it's just the perfect place for gossip, scandal, and corruption to run amok. So Leila was living in Chicago, but she returned to Shady Palms about a year prior, and she's been working at her family's restaurant business, Tita Rosie's Kitchen, ever since. Rosie is Leila's aunt, and she owns the restaurant, but it's really a family enterprise. Leila's grandmother, numerous aunts, godmothers, all notably women, gather and work at this restaurant, and they're all very close. Derek, Leila's ex-boyfriend, is the town's resident food blogger. He goes around to all the restaurants in town, writes nasty reviews, and interestingly, always seems to discover outrageous health violations, to which he refers his friend, the health inspector, who in turn refers his friend, the contractor, to fix said violations. You know what's up with that. Anyway, Derek and his stepdad come in to Tita Rosie's one day and they sit down and they order. And Derek starts insulting the food again. And Leila's like, why are you even here if you hate the food so much? He gives some sort of dumb answer and it doesn't really matter. But then he falls face first into his dessert. They call an ambulance. Derek is taken away. His stepdad looks on, claims he's in shock. Doesn't really do anything to help. Later they get a call saying Derek apparently died from arsenic poisoning. And the stepdad, who is a real estate developer, and who owns the building that Tita Rosie's is in, claims the restaurant killed Derek. Who at the restaurant killed Derek? He doesn't really know, because he doesn't really know anybody in this town. He and Derek's mother only got married 2 years ago, so stepdad doesn't really know much about Derek as a person or his situation or who he knows or who his enemies are. Enter Detective Park, the kind of detective who really wants to solve the case on paper and close it as far as the public is concerned. That means pinning the crime on the most convenient victim so justice can be served, and so he looks like a hero cop. There are a lot of layers to what is going on here. The most obvious here being the blatant police corruption, but the other big issue is race. Derek was white, and there's no denying that being white comes with privileges. One of those privileges being that cops are generally on your side. So basically, Leela is the easiest target to pin this murder on because she and Derek dated 10 years ago, and in the meantime, he has said mean things about her family's business. So according to Detective Park, case closed, that is the motive for the murder. And it's frustrating because we see Park bending over backwards to make the evidence fit and convict Leela. And you can tell it's the racism and the discrimination is clear. But what can they do? They just have to go along to avoid the alternative, although they don't know what that alternative is, but it probably would be even worse. There's even more layers with this. Detective Park and Rosie, Leela's aunt who owns the restaurant, seem to know each other somehow, but it's not made clear how they know each other, but they seem to have somewhat of a soft spot for each other. More so Detective Park for Rosie than Rosie does for Detective Park. So Park claims he's just doing his job in railroading Leela, but meanwhile he's trying to get close to Rosie, and I mean, they don't get physical with each other, but I feel like this dynamic violates the rules of consent. Like, he has Leela's fate in his hands, so whether or not Rosie actually wants to be near him is unclear, because of course she's gonna do what she feels she needs to do in order to encourage a better outcome for Leela. As a professional, I feel like Park should have understood this. Either he needs to go back to harassment training, or more likely he just doesn't care. I don't know if this was an intentional theme by the author because it's not really hammered in like the corruption and the racism are, but I noticed it and I think it's important. As you can probably tell, since I went straight from synopsis to ranting about themes, I was fired up reading this book. It felt personal. The chain of events that Leela faced seemed absurd, but absolutely realistic. Like it could happen to any person of color because that's how the system operates. This is not a myth anymore. This is a fact of life. And non-white people have to adapt to work within a system that is not meant to serve them. This is a tangent, but I feel like a lot of people have a narrative in their head when the whole cops and racism discussion comes up. And that image is easily dismissed because you see something that person could have done differently. If only that person was calmer or whatever, everything would have been fine. And so the conclusion from that is we're out here unfairly vilifying cops. Well, Leela is not that stereotype. Far from it. And neither is her family. They're a hardworking, close-knit family, and they got wrapped up in this entire murder scandal because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not saying that just to prove a point. By the end of this book, you'll see how insignificant Leela's actions and her family's actions were, but you'll see how significant their race and their economic status was. That's another one. This book does touch on economic status and how it dictates who has power and who doesn't. And I mean, you can see that with the stepdad who owns the building that the restaurant is in. He has, some motives. Overall, the book was very exciting. It was a page turner because I just had to get to the end to find out how Leela and her family were going to survive this injustice. I didn't really care who killed Derek or why, but you'll find that out too. For a book that deals with such heavy and infuriating topics, it was surprisingly lighthearted. Leela's family is just so sweet, and they have such a recognizable family culture. I'm not Filipino myself, so I can't claim that as my culture, but I am somewhat Filipino adjacent. So there's a lot in their family dynamic that I recognize and that feels cozy to me. There's also a good amount of comic relief. Leela has 3 godmothers who hang out in the restaurant. Their names are April, May, and June. and Leela calls them the calendar crew. They're always gossiping and making jokes, and it's pretty funny. I also felt like the pacing in this book was done really well because things moved along very quickly. And even when we were listening to Leela's inner monologue, it wasn't boring and it didn't feel like the story was ever at a standstill because Leela was always doing something. And that movement weaved into the narrative really smoothly. I feel like there are some books that you can be listening to inner monologue for pages on end and you feel like the character is just kind of standing there talking to space, because there's just no mention of what the character is doing. So you don't know. It's like they could just be standing talking to a wall, and it gets tedious really quickly. But that's not the case in this book. Hello there. So I just finished reading Arsenic and Adobo, and I'm going to be starting Homicide and Halo-Halo soon. I'm just really excited to see where the story is going to go from here. I found Arsenic and Adobo was just really exciting. It was non-stop. It really got me fired up in places. There was just a ton going on and there were a ton of characters. So there's really a lot that can be explored in Homicide and Halo-Halo. I just can't even think of which way the story's gonna go next. But on the other hand, it's like, so this story is taking place in a town with only 20,000 people. So like, what could possibly happen next in this town of 20,000 people that is going to seem believable? Because unless it's like how the Series of Unfortunate Events series is, where that's just the comedy that so many bad things keep happening in one place and it's just outrageous that so many things keep happening. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess we're going to see what things happen next. So like always, I have avoided reading the synopsis for Homicide and Halo-Halo because I don't want to be spoiled. So I am going in completely blind. So yeah, the series is off to a great start. It was very exciting and it was very engaging and it felt very homey and comforting. Yeah, so I'm really glad that I picked up this book after kind of ignoring it for a long time. And we're gonna see how much I like Homicide and Halo-Halo, and if this author can do it again with the next book. So I'm gonna get reading.
We are close, can you feel it? Something is behind the clouds. We just have to believe it, that we can make the sun come out. Let us lose ourselves in a fairy tale. Who can say what's wrong or right? We're the only ones who can decide. Baby, you and I should start living now. With the whole world at our feet, we could stay or we could leave. There is nothing in between. So baby, we should start living now. 'Cause we only have this life. Wanna laugh and wanna cry. I don't wanna waste my time. So baby, we should start living now. Baby, we should start living now. Baby, we should start living now.
Homicide and Halo-Halo. The structure of this book is quite different from Arsenic and Adobo, but it has the same cozy vibe. In Arsenic and Adobo, we learn that Leela won Miss Shady Palms, which is a town beauty pageant that is beloved in town because it awards one girl a scholarship, basically enabling them to get out of this town. But there isn't much info in that book about this whole thing because Leela's a murder suspect, so her beauty pageant days weren't given much thought. In Homicide and Halo-Halo, it's taking place a few months after the events of Arsenic and Adobo, and Leela is essentially recovering from the ordeal a few months back. She wasn't convicted, but she did spend some time in jail anyway, and that traumatized her. More on what's going on with that in a bit. So in this book, Leela and her two friends are opening a cafe and bake shop called the Bruja Cafe. Leela's specialty is baking creative Filipino treats, so she's basically trying to come up with creative recipes to wow her customers. But she kind of has a mental block at the moment. Her signature treat, which came up in the last book as well, is ube crinkle cookies, which is a real thing. They are amazing if you've never had one, so you must hunt them down right now. Meanwhile, Leela is also asked to judge this year's Miss Shady Palms pageant, so she has a lot on her plate, alongside her lingering trauma. The pageant is sponsored by the Thompson family, basically a rich and powerful family, you know, the kind of family who will throw other family members under the bus in order to become the most powerful person in a powerful family. Sound familiar? So the elder Thompsons have passed away, and they left the company in control of their son, Rob, passing over Rob's older sister, Valerie. Rob is a charismatic screw-up, but he aligns with the company values, i.e. conservative values. Valerie, on the other hand, has big ideas on how to make the company, as well as something as problematic as a beauty pageant, just a teensy bit more progressive. Anything helps. Rob is a gross middle-aged man, and he is hitting on the 16-year-old girls in the pageant. And then he's found dead in a creek. I can't remember how he died. It might have been a head injury, but I don't think it matters. But he is a rich and important man, so of course it matters. So that happens. But then, oddly enough, Detective Park shows up, asking Leela for some insight to help him solve the case, because he thinks it might be related to the pageant. And Leela is a judge, and she is a former winner, so she knows her way around the pageant or something. There are several people around who would have a motive to kill Rob, for various reasons. His much younger wife, in order to get his money and to get control of the company. Valerie also wants control of the company. Actually, she should have had it in the first place. That is another issue that I am not even going to really try to unpack. Ageism, ableism, progressivism, all kinds of things go into that I don't have the brain power to discuss right now, but she was wronged. Needless to say, a lot of isms went into the decision by her parents to not give her control of the company. Or it could have been one of the pageant parents for hitting on their teenage daughter. But who does Detective Park zero in on as the prime suspect? Leela's cousin Bernadette. I definitely cannot remember what exactly his reasons were. They were just that ridiculous. But while Detective Park is being dumb in his investigation again, he has somehow been welcomed into Leela's family. And he and Rosie still have an undefined and questionable relationship. This is the start of a very confusing storyline that continues into the next book that I still don't understand, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, this is still technically a murder mystery, but solving the murder feels a lot less important in this book because Leela is not the target of the investigation and Leela is the main character. So the stakes just aren't as high. I mean, they are for Bernadette, but her struggle isn't actually highlighted in the story very much. So we know what's happening with her, kind of, but it's not a focus. Instead, the focus is still all around Leela. This has good and bad points. The good part about it is that the narrative is highlighting Leela's struggle with trauma and not knowing how to deal with it. Several people in her life actually keep suggesting that she go and see a therapist, but she doesn't want to. One of the reasons that she says being that mental illness is seen as a weakness in Asian cultures, and she doesn't want to be seen as weak. So she basically doesn't want to admit that she needs help. Another reason, which she doesn't outright say, but I feel is implied, is a distrust in the medical system, which is another system that was built to serve white folk, and where non-white folk routinely receive subpar or predatory care. The bad part is that if you're interested in the solving of the actual murder, then you'll probably be disappointed because the whole thing is kind of glossed over in this book. It's like it's kind of there as a structure to move the narrative, but the story still centers around Leela, and the murder investigation does not center around Leela. So there's like a disconnect there. Because of that, I found the book overall less riveting. The tone of this book is a lot calmer and a lot more introspective. The themes focus more on mental health and interpersonal relationships and general misogyny, male entitlement, and ickiness that comes with old men running a beauty pageant for young girls. There's this one moment that I really liked. Rob's widow, Beth, who is a PR professional, was trying to smooth things over after something happened at the pageant. And she gave this usual bland PR non-apology. And one of the girls called her out on it, basically saying, "You say you're sorry, but what are you actually going to do to change things?" Which is a fair question. Beth didn't have a response, probably because she was just stunned that someone younger than her would call her out on her crap. But the girl walked away, and Beth remarked, "Youths, do they have to be so frightfully earnest all the time?" And I'm like, yeah, they do. That is how we're going to wrangle the world back from people who care more about their own optics than the realities of pretty much everybody else in the world who is working so hard and struggling to survive, like Leela's family. Amongst all of these hard-hitting topics, there are a lot of descriptions of actual food, which is very cozy, but also made me quite sad hearing about all of these delicious sounding treats when I have no ube crinkle cookies. In some places, the food descriptions went a little bit overboard, sounded a little bit forced, like it's a strange thing to be saying in normal conversations. But I'll give it a pass because the vast majority of the other dialogue was witty and peppy and pithy. It was great. Also, I want to mention that I listened to a lot of this book in audiobook form, and I think it was a really great decision to do that because the voice actor's performance was just superb. The accents and timing in the audiobook were spot on, and I think I had a better experience with the book because of it. I felt like I was more authentically in the story because I got to hear the correct pronunciations of some words that I didn't know. And it just doesn't have the same effect when you're reading it yourself and you know you're pronouncing the words wrong. It was just really enjoyable to listen to, and I kind of regret not listening to all of it on audio.
I let you down, and I know that I was not always around. I made you feel alone. You spent most of your nights just sitting on your own. I should have done so much more, like giving you the things you asked me for. And I know I was wrong. It's what I try to tell you with my song. Tell you with my song. What if I said I'm sorry? What if I'd make a scene? Wouldn't that make you mine again? You're all I'll ever need. Didn't I make you laugh? Didn't I make you smile? Didn't I make you feel like you were happy for a while? I know that I've done so many things that let you down, but I hope that you give me one chance.
So I'm working on reading Blackmail and Bibingka right now, and I really thought this was a trio, so I thought this was going to be the last book in the series. Apparently it's not. There's going to be another book in the series that will be released in November or October, so it's a pretty long time away. I think because of that, I have to somewhat adjust my expectations, I think, with this book, because I was expecting it to kind of be the finale, so I was expecting a lot of things to be wrapped up, but I guess they're not going to be. Like, things are going to continue, so any criticisms that I have so far where I'm like, I'm still confused about what's happening and I don't foresee it being like adequately or satisfyingly concluded, and it's because it's not the conclusion. So yeah, that's news to me, but I mean, I'm pleased because I do like the series and it is very cozy, and even though it is seeming a bit series of unfortunate events-y, like it's quite outrageous, it's kind of like comedy of the absurd, it's fun and it's enjoyable. I'm enjoying hearing about all the delicious foods, and I'm just having a great time reading it. So even if it's not like the most hard-hitting, well, I mean, no, it actually is pretty, because it does touch on some really important and hard-hitting topics, but in such a comfy way. I'm just really loving it. So if there's another one coming out, I'm all for it. I'm gonna put it on my excited to read list, and I will probably fill you in when I do read it in October. So yeah, gonna continue reading. Blackmail and Bibingka. Here we are at the third book in the series. At the start of Blackmail and Bibingka, Leela's cousin Ronnie is back in town after having disappeared without a word 15 years ago. Ronnie is Tita Rosie's only child, and so she's conflicted in her feelings about seeing him pop up in town again. On one hand, she loves him unconditionally, but on the other hand, she's pretty mad at him for disappearing. Everybody else in the family is not conflicted. They hate him, and nobody is shy about saying that out loud. So Ronnie is back in town because he is opening a winery in Shady Palms, and he brought his investors and business partners in town to get everything set up. He doesn't outright say that he misses his family, but it is implied, and it's the basis of one of the more subtle conflicts in the story, which is that Ronnie is universally despised. However, there's the lingering question of whether the reason why he is actually hated is fair and reasonable. More on that later. The main conflict, of course, comes from another untimely death in town. This time, it's one of Ronnie's investors, Denise, who collapses and dies after drinking a bottle of the winery's own wine. Did she accidentally die of alcohol poisoning, or was she murdered? We know the answer by now, but it's still fun to ask. So, who killed Denise with a bottle of her own wine? To add to the chaos, Tita Rosie receives a blackmail email demanding that she send this person $50,000 or he will tell everyone in town what happened in Florida. This is irrelevant to the story, but I just love a good Florida joke. It must have been something weird because it happened in Florida. You know, those Florida men. So, the narrative moving questions here are: who killed Denise? Why did they kill her? Who is blackmailing Tita Rosie and why? And then, what happened in Florida? And why does Ronnie's family hate him so much? In a typical murder mystery, you would think those first two questions about the actual murder would be the most riveting, but in this book they are not. I almost feel like this book pulls a little bit of a bait and switch. Like, it pulls you in promising to be a murder mystery, but it's actually more of a family drama. Now that I look back, this trend actually started back in Homicide and Halo-Halo, the veering away from the mystery and becoming more of a family drama kind of story. But I think in Homicide and Halo-Halo, the murder still felt relevant to Leela and to the family and to the community of Shady Palms, so we still cared about solving the murder. In this case, Denise just popped into town and her only connection to the family is Ronnie, who is on the outs. So I feel like I have no reason to care about this murder or the drama that caused it. So I feel like there's just another disconnect in this book. Like, it's trying to mesh together two storylines that are actually pretty unrelated. There's Ronnie's business drama, which relates to the murder, and then there's Leela and her family, and their problem in the book is with Ronnie personally. And because it's Leela and her family that I'm here to read about, I care a lot more about finding out what happened with Ronnie than I care about finding out what happened with Denise. I didn't actually care at all why Denise died, so the end of the book where all of this stuff is getting figured out kind of felt a little bit anticlimactic to me. In terms of themes that I noticed and cared about, I feel like the main thing that stood out was how Ronnie was treated. And I have a feeling that what I got from the text was not the author's intention. The narrative is structured from Leela's point of view, and she and the family are the protagonists, so we're supposed to sympathize with them. Criticize them at some points, yes, but mostly sympathize with them. And since they all hate Ronnie, we're supposed to hate him too. And in the beginning, before I knew what was happening, I really did hate him. But then the reasons why started trickling into the equation, and then I wasn't so sure anymore. To me, it became a question of how long is it fair to define a person based on their past? I mean things that happened long in the past. Is it fair to discount the present because of the past? I feel like that's what the family is doing. So things happened when Ronnie was a kid. Things led to other things. But then it's like the biggest outrage with Ronnie was the fact that he left town and left the family, not any specific crime against humanity that he committed. Without spoiling anything, I don't blame him for leaving town. And that leads me to the last running theme that I want to talk about, and that's something that's been present in all of the books, and that is the family unit culture. I think this is present in a lot of Asian cultures and probably other cultures too, and that is this kind of toxic family pride and closeness. The closeness is usually a good thing. It's one of the things that I noticed early on and that really drew me into the book and made me feel like this book just had so much love in it. The family was just so loving and supportive of one another, and that's usually great, but at times it gets toxic and cliquey, and it's disguised under the guise of being supportive. Throughout the book, I felt like the family was being pretty insensitive to Ronnie. They didn't listen to him, they dismissed him, assumed the worst of him all the time, and ganged up on him. But they didn't see it as being insensitive because they were supporting each other against him, the apparent enemy. And one of the reasons they brought up was that Ronnie was an embarrassment to the family. So in order to keep up the family image, they would rather toss out one member for the benefit of the group rather than try to help an individual. This is nothing to say about the writing. I actually think the author did an amazing job in capturing the Filipino culture in this series. It's clear that she really understands what she's writing about, and she's not just appropriating a culture to sell a book. So anyway, I guess the family and Leela were kind of getting on my nerves a little bit towards the end. Even Leela, I felt, was getting a little bit too comfortable considering herself an honorary detective. If I didn't mention before, Detective Park is there again asking Leela to participate in this investigation, even though she's not a detective. She really has nothing to do with it, but somehow she's participating again. Meanwhile, Detective Park is seeming less and less detective-like. Maybe this is all foreshadowing. While we're on the topic of Detective Park, I am very confused about his character's journey. He started as this hard-ass detective who kind of had a soft spot for Rosie, but he was still pretty hard-ass about doing his job. I still have no idea how they actually know each other, and it's bugging me at this point. But despite trying to pin Derek's murder on Leela, somehow they've accepted him as like a member of their family. So they forgive him for essentially framing Leela last month, but they won't forgive Ronnie for things that happened 15 plus years ago. Besides that, I feel like his politics have changed dramatically. I mean, yeah, people grow, but they don't usually do a political 180 in the span of a few months. And I feel like I know what all of this is setting up for in the next book, and I don't like it. I don't like this whole Detective Park and Rosie thing. It's one of the few things I didn't like in this series, actually. So, where we leave the series feels somewhat up in the air. I'm a bit confused about how things stand, but I feel like there's still a lot to explore in the next book. I hate Park and Rosie together, but now that we've gone down that path, we have to see where it leads. There's also been a lot of hints about Leela's relationship with her late mother. Not much info on that so far, but we know that it affects her, so getting more into that would definitely be interesting. Lots of options, and I am looking forward to reading it in October. So those are my thoughts on the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery series so far. It wasn't perfect, but I really enjoyed it. Maybe because so much of it just felt so close to home for me, and so it just definitely felt cozy and homey and comforting. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. That is all for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!
Now that I'm looking back, I can see all the signs I tried to